Hi, and welcome again to this latest episode of the Plata Ward 4 Update Podcast. This is David Jenkins, the Plata Town Council member from Ward 4, and your host for this podcast and video, now also available on YouTube and YouTube Music. So this podcast is the first in a series of podcasts about the housing shortage. This first episode will be about Maryland information and what it means about the housing shortage here in Maryland. This will then be followed shortly by a separate podcast video about the housing issues in Charles County. Now, this first episode provides information from Maryland, specifically from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development and their presentation at the Maryland Municipal League's August 1st, 2024 Housing Symposium. So the next slide talks about, the next page talks about, shows, this is a graphic from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development's website that deals specifically with the housing issue in Maryland, turning the key. So you can find all the information about what I'm going to talk about in terms of information and legislation and other programs about housing in Maryland. And I'll provide a link to this and other information from this site as well. So the next slide, the next page. So what is the housing crisis here in Maryland? Well, like other states, we are facing a housing affordability crisis caused by a supply of housing shortage. We're not building enough of them, and we haven't built them at a sufficient pace. So Maryland estimates we are short in the state of housing by about 96,000 housing units. That's a lot. So over the last 10 years, Maryland has underproduced housing at a rate of 5,600 units per year on an average. Again, that's a pretty big number. So you can see how it affects the state. These are just some headlines. Of particular interest, you see here, there's a headline from a paper or a location here in Southern Maryland. That is from the Southern Maryland Association of Realtors. They talk about the housing shortage and inventory and therefore an affordability crisis. So let's get into some of the specifics of some of the information. So this graphic on the left, this pie chart shows the share of Maryland renters who spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So 48% spend less than 30%, whereas 52% spend more than 30% of their income on rental payments. That's kind of the cutoff point as a standard 30% of your income. The right pie chart shows for homeowners who spend more than 30%. So 23% spend more than 30% of their income on housing, whereas 77% don't. So that seems like a pretty good number, but 23% is still pretty high. That's almost a quarter. That's pretty high. This next graphic then shows, the next page shows what is the actual impact. Well, it causes higher living costs. That is because rents are increasing. There are fewer homes on the market, and therefore home prices increase as well. So as I said earlier, and this says it again, more than half of Maryland renters, 52%, are cost burdened. That is, paying 30% or more of their wages on house-related costs. The median home value in 2010 was $300,000 and is now estimated to be $398,000, an increase of 32%. And since 2010, the median rents rose 37%. Again, big increases. So this is just a graphic that shows interest rates on a graph over a timeline since 2008, where they were going to 6 and they would drop down and kind of fluctuate between 3 to 5%, as low as a little over 3% in 2021-22. But then we've unfortunately seen this rapid increase approaching 8% over the last year to 18 months. So that's a pretty big number when you're trying to make a down payment on a 30-year fixed mortgage payment. So here's what I found out as of August 16th for a typical 30-year fixed mortgage loan of borrowing $300,000. 20% down payment. Credit score is 700 to 719. That's pretty high. That hopefully will get you a possible interest rate of 7.2%. Still pretty high. Come down a little bit. For 30-year fixed for FHA, 6.6. 30-year fixed for VA, 6.6. So you can again see the rate is still pretty high, and hopefully will be coming down further as the year moves on. So this has an impact on the Maryland economy. This is a reference to the Maryland Comptroller's Brooke Lehrman's 2022 report, State of the Maryland Economy, that found that the Maryland economy grew at a rate of just 1.6% as compared to 13.9% nationally. Again, driven in part by, quote, the availability of affordable housing for lower and middle income households, end of quote. Maryland ranks 7th in the cost of living out of 50 states. I didn't know it was that high, but it is. This is a graphic, this next page, from the Maryland Association of Realtors. They do annual polling of citizens and found that 99% of those responding between the ages of 18 and 34 say it's harder to buy a home today than it was for previous generations. I can certainly attest to that. When I bought my house 35 years ago and then refinanced, it was less than 3%, and when I refinanced several years ago, it was 3.4%. My daughter and her husband, who live in Baltimore City, were looking at houses in Carroll County. They put a contract in on 2 houses. They didn't get them. And in one instance, one of the houses that was bought by a family or a person that paid $80,000 in cash over the asking price. That is difficult to compete with. So they've kind of pulled back, and we'll wait till hopefully there's a better opportunity in times to think about buying a house. But you can see the numbers here. More importantly, another distressing fact, is that this polling indicates 30% of young Marylanders are considering leaving the state due to high costs. And you would think, well, that maybe they're going to move to Florida or the Sun Belt down south, or maybe in Arizona, so it's warmer climates, or Texas. But in fact, a lot are also moving to West Virginia and Pennsylvania, again, because of the lower cost of living in those states than compared to Maryland. So there was also an interesting poll by an organization called Greater Washington that talks about the Maryland metropolitan area, and shows that their polling indicates that 72% voters said the state government should do more to improve access for rental and home ownership opportunities. 61% supported a state law requiring local governments to allow more homes near rail transit. And similar, 62% supported a law to require or allow more income-restricted homes near transit. That means more affordable housing that can be supported by mortgage loans or grants or other financing elements to help them buy a house or even rent a house. And it's important that it's around transit stops, because it does allow the opportunity to access jobs for those who don't have a car or have difficulty only having one car, because owning a car is also expensive as well. So this makes sense to have housing in and around or near transit. So again, this next page is just a graphic that shows the full dimensions of housing and how it affects the broad spectrum of our quality of life by housing quality, the housing burden, cost burden, which we talked about, increase in homelessness, the lack of transportation or transportation options other than a car, the neighborhood quality in terms of those living in poverty, residential instability in communities with higher evictions and foreclosures. Folks are doubling up. That is, more family members are living together because they can't afford to buy or rent a house or an apartment. Lack of access to paying jobs, again, transportation issue. And an important issue is access to good performing schools. I know here in the county I've heard anecdotal stories about folks looking for neighborhoods where they believe there are good schools and they can get and have access to them. So it affects the full dimension of our community. The state through the new governor, has a 2024 state plan. One of the elements is an objective to making the state of Maryland a desirable and affordable home for all residents, that it provide affordable housing for all. You can see the quote by the governor. And then get specific, the objective of that goal is to tackle the affordable housing shortage, revitalize disinvested communities, that is middle and lower income communities, housing the most vulnerable, that is not only the income related, but also those that are handicapped and elderly who can't get around and have a hard time afford housing, and also as a way to build wealth through home ownership. These are some of the objectives of the state plan for more affordable housing. And with every strategic plan or plan, you need to have metrics to measure their performance over time. So this is the state's key performance indicators for affordable housing. I'm not necessarily going to read all these, but you can see it's pretty extensive. And this is a way that the state can hopefully be very transparent on their success or lack of success or any progress they're making. Hopefully they'll be able to go back and to document and be very transparent of their progress based upon these key performance indicators. And I'll be looking for that as well. And hopefully we'll be able to pass that forward to you as well. So in the General Assembly last year, the governor submitted a number of bills that directly related to housing, affordability, and opportunities. And you can see those bills listed here: Housing Expansion Affordability, Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act. That's important. I've had some contact with renters here in Plata as well, and landlords. Housing and Community Development Financing Act. Again, other financing tools to help folks to purchase house or to rent housing. And a Just Communities bill to help, again, distressed communities. This next page tries to summarize some of the inputs to that legislation during the General Assembly. You can see their effort for partnership by having a number of folks who testified in support of it, the number of committee and subcommittee work group meetings with folks from the General Assembly, that is both the House side and the Senate side, and then the number of yes votes in those committees to help them pass some of this legislation. And then you can see here on the right some of the outcomes. So there's a new community development entity. I believe it's a new financing corporation to help housing affordability. There's a new office, first ever Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs. That's important because we've had some of that here in the Plata and Charles County as well. More investment in capital budget for multiple investment opportunities in housing and community development. Increase to support development density where we want it. And this goes to the issue that just because there's a housing shortage doesn't mean that we should allow housing everywhere in the town or in the county. I know that's a big issue for a lot of folks, and I understand that. What it does suggest, and it does mean we should put housing where it's most needed, but also where there's needed infrastructure, transportation, schools, and water and sewer and other related facilities. Excuse me. And I provided some other past podcasts and videos about that, and I'll provide links to those as well, and I'll be talking about it in the future. It does talk, some of the legislation talked about landlords and what they should be doing with respect to offering a right of first refusal, and then also certain tenant rights. They're looking at community designation programs to target investment in more investment in disinvested areas, and then increase the filing fees for eviction, and then reduction in the allowable security deposit for a month's rent. So again, I didn't want to burden you with all these particulars of some of the outcome of the legislation, but I will include those in the notes with either links and or websites. So again, I just wanted to provide a perspective about the housing shortage, both first starting in the state, so I give you the larger perspective, and then shortly I'll be following up with the next podcast on this series and video about Charles County housing information and issues and needs here in Charles County, because you'll see the same kind of trends here as well. So I want to thank you for listening and watching my videos, but also listening to the podcast. And again, please, feel free to email me your questions and comments at my email address, djenkins@townofplata.org. And again, I appreciate you listening. Be safe and enjoy the rest of your summer. And I hope you have a great upcoming school season. Thank you.